Hi Salem South Lyon patrons, it's Jean from the library again, and today I thought I would show you how to make an old-fashioned yeast risen bread. Many people are afraid of using the yeast in the kneading and all of that, and while the no-knead breads are quite simple and quick to prepare, they have a long rise time, so from start to finish it's often 12 to 18, sometimes 24 hours. This bread, I can start it in early afternoon, around lunchtime, and it can be ready for dinner. In a warm house, you can have this done in 4 hours on a cooler day, or, things are just cooler in the house. It might take you 5 or 6 hours, and you can slow the process or speed the process up within that parameter. So let's get started. This is the book that I was given by a friend when I was taught how to make bread. I found it extremely helpful with really good instructions and a lot of information on how the process all works. That being said, I'm doing this video because I don't want you to be afraid. There's no reason to be afraid of yeast bread. It's not that hard. You can do it. But this book is helpful if you'd like to find it. Some of the equipment you'll need is you'll need loaf pans, 8x4 loaf pan. If you're making a loaf bread, you could choose to use a cookie sheet and make rolls. You could use a cookie sheet to make, right today, what I'm going to make is hamburger buns because my husband wants hamburgers for dinner, so that's what we're going to do. Other equipment you'll need is you'll need a bowl, just an ordinary bowl, measuring spoons and liquid measuring cups, and a dry measuring cup. Again, it's not rocket science. You can do this. It's easy. Okay, we're going to start with 2 cups of flour. Today I'm using all-purpose flour, but there have been days that I've mixed part all-purpose and part whole wheat. As long as you don't go beyond the 50-50, I think it comes out okay. If you try to go more than that, it gets a little dense and kind of on the drier side. So I prefer to stay at that. But today we're just going to use regular old all-purpose unbleached white flour. Nothing fancy. So you're going to take 2 cups of white flour, and we are going to add the yeast. I buy yeast in bulk, so I don't have a package, but typically you would use 1 package of yeast in this recipe. 1 package is about 2 1/4 teaspoons, so that's what I'm putting in. And then we're going to put about 2 teaspoons of salt. One, 2. 1/3 cup of sugar. Sugar is one of those things that helps the yeast to be active and rise. So then you're going to kind of mix those. You could get out a whisk if you wanted, especially if your flour is a little lumpy. You might want to get out a whisk and whisk it. I usually just use the measuring spoon. To that, we are going to add 1/3 cup of oil. The only oil I ever typically have is olive oil. I believe the recipe even said vegetable oil. You could use that. You could use coconut oil if you wanted to put a little bit of that sweetness into it. So you take that and you kind of just mix it a little. And then you're going to add 1.5 cups of kind of lukewarm water. If you touch it and it feels kind of the same temperature as your skin, you're in the right place. Again, we don't have to get too fancy. You don't have to measure and make sure it's this temperature or whatever. That's all I do is take water and warm it. So I'm going to mix that all up. All right, so I've stirred that up, and you can see it's very loose, runny. At this point, we're going to start adding more flour. You're going to probably put somewhere between 4 and 5.5 cups, depending on the humidity of the day. If the day is really cold and dry, like in the dead of winter and the furnace is running, you may not need as much flour. If it's a really hot, humid day and there's a lot of moisture in the air, you might need a little more. You're going to play it by feel. So we're going to start with 1/2 cup at a time. And you just keep mixing with, I use a spatula, you could use a wooden spoon if you wanted. You will eventually get to the point where you're using your hands and kind of kneading and adding at the same time. While I'm mixing that in, I'll explain why I use this bowl. Again, you could use any bowl you have. You could even mix a little with a mixer. I think the instructions even say to use a mixer. I just do it by hand. This is quicker for me. This bowl in particular I use because I'm going to knead right in this, because it's got that kind of oval shape to it. I'm going to knead right in here, and I'm going to knead in this bowl because I'm lazy. I don't like to have to clean the counter after. Just laziness. There's no reason you couldn't put some flour on your counter, or use a breadboard with some flour on it, or your kitchen table with some flour on it to knead there. I just happen to knead in the bowl to make my life a little easier. So we're just going to keep adding flour. So now I've added probably another 1.5 cups of flour. And you can see the dough's getting stiffer, and it's getting a little bit harder to mix with that spatula. It's just not mixing in. So I will switch to my hands at this point and start adding the flour a little bit at a time. I'll probably go down to like 1/4 to 1/2 cup, a little bit less at a time, and just start pushing it around to incorporate it. So here we go. We'll put a little bit more in, and then you push with this part of your hand. I don't know if you can see this. You kind of push like this, and then you fold it back, and you push again, and I turn the bowl sometimes and keep doing that. And I just keep doing that. So it usually takes me, 5-10 minutes, not even 10, probably more like 5 to 8, to have incorporated all the flour I need and just get to plain kneading. I've moved over to the kitchen table simply for the reason that I'm so short that I can get better movement of my hands if I'm at the table, which is lower than the counter. So if you're struggling and you're only, 5'2" like me, move to the table, a lower surface. So I'll just continue with that until the dough gets to where it's not sticky feeling anymore. And I would say that's usually about 5 minutes at most. Okay, I've been kneading for about 5 minutes, and you can see it's not real sticky anymore. It's pliable. It's what they call it is smooth elastic. I am almost to the point where it's done. Like I say, it's been maybe 5 minutes, and you can consider this your homestead workout for your arms today. But no big deal, pretty quick and pretty easy. Now that I have this dough ready, I am going to put it in another bowl, only because this bowl is so wide the bread would spread out instead of up. So I'm going to switch to a different bowl. This bowl has been greased with butter to make it easier to pull out the dough later. So, and the instructions in that recipe always taught me, and so I always do this. You put the bread dough down in the pan, or in the grease bowl, and then you turn it over so the top is a little greased too, so it doesn't stick to whatever you cover it with. Recipe calls to cover it with plastic wrap, but if you're like me, where you're trying to minimize your waste going into the waste stream, you could use something like this. This is a waxed cloth. It's a piece of fabric impregnated with some wax. That would work well to seal it. What you want to do is hold in the moisture. You don't want the top of that drying out while it's rising. Another thing I've used is a dinner plate. Just a plain old dinner plate right on top of the bowl. Fits nicely. And then we're going to put this in a warm place to rise. Usually takes an hour, maybe to an hour and a half. Kind of look at the size you have there. You want it to double. Also, you can tell when something has completely risen is when you put your finger in it. After it's risen, you're going to push it with your finger and it will stay indented. It doesn't pop right back up. Well, it's been a couple of hours. Of course, when you're going to do something to show somebody else, it takes a little longer. It's a cooler day, and the temperature in the house wasn't that warm, so it took a little longer. I could have sped that up by putting it in a sunny window or on top of a register if the heat were on, but the heat's not on yet. So, but it rose just the same. It's just a matter of time. So this recipe makes 2 loaves of bread, or I usually get about 18 rolls if I'm making rolls, or maybe a dozen hamburger buns. So today I'm going to make hamburger buns for today, and then I'm going to make a loaf of bread so that I have that for tomorrow. So I'm going to take just a pair of kitchen shears and cut the dough in half. You could use like a sharp knife. I just find the kitchen shears works well for me. And the recipe actually calls you to knead it again to get the bubbles out of it and stuff. I don't bother. I just take my my bread dough out and I just kind of mash it around a little and consider that good enough. And I take it and shape it kind of like a loaf with the seam towards the bottom. I take a greased loaf pan and I put it in the loaf pan. It will now rise again. This rising is a little quicker. You want it to rise so that it's about, they say, an inch above the pan. I'm dealing with a pan that's really quite high and a smaller loaf of bread. I'll be happy if it, even comes close to the top. If it goes over, great. If not, it's just so flexible. You can adapt. It's going to be okay no matter what. So we're going to let this rise again. A lot of times what I do for the second rising is I place it on the top of the stove and turn the oven on to preheat. I'm going to preheat my oven to 350, and usually 45 minutes to an hour later, the bread is ready to go in. If you're doing rolls or the hamburger buns, it's a little bit quicker. It's usually, definitely 40 minutes or so, and you can get them in the oven. So there you have it, a delicious loaf of bread. It wasn't that difficult. Give it a try. I know you can do it. Bye.